Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to tackle a really old philosophy that, believe it or not, asks some incredibly modern and pretty tough questions. We are talking all about Aristotle's virtue ethics. So let's just start with maybe the biggest question there is. What actually makes a life a good life? I mean, really think about it. Is it about happiness? Is it about success? Being a moral person? People have been wrestling with this one for thousands of years. You know, when most of us think about ethics, our minds usually jump to a set of rules, right? Like a moral checklist. Don't do this, always do that. It's all about following instructions for what to do in a given situation. But what if that's the wrong way to look at it? What if the real key isn't about what you do, but about who you are? Well, way back, over 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle came up with a pretty powerful answer. And yeah, he'd basically turned that whole question on its head. For him, it wasn't about the rules at all. It was all about character. Okay, so for Aristotle, the ultimate goal in life, the one thing we're all aiming for, whether we know it or not, is something he called eudaimonia. Now, you'll often see this translated as happiness, but honestly, that word is a little weak. It's much bigger than that. Think of it more like human flourishing or living and doing well. It's about reaching your full potential, being the absolute best version of a human you can be. And Aristotle was a super practical guy. He thought of it like this. If you're an archer, you need a target to aim at, right? Well, eudaimonia is that target for our lives. Once you know what you're aiming for, this idea of human flourishing, it makes it so much easier to figure out what to do every single day. All your little choices can be aimed at hitting that big, important mark. So the next logical question is, how do we actually get there? How do we flourish? Aristotle's logic, which we call the function argument, is actually pretty straightforward. He said, look, everything has a specific job, a function. A harpist's function is to play the harp, and a good harpist plays it well. So what's a human's function? What's the one thing we can do that nothing else can? For Aristotle, the answer was clear. We can reason. So it follows that a good life, a flourishing life, means using our reason, and using it excellently. And this right here is the absolute key. Reasoning well isn't something you just do once. It's a constant activity. And when he talks about an activity of the soul, he doesn't mean something spooky. Soul for him was basically the core of who you are, your mind, your will, your character. So living well means that core part of you is constantly acting with excellence. And that excellence, he had a word for it, arete, which we now call virtue. Okay, that all sounds great in theory, but what does it actually look like to be virtuous day to day? How do we even begin to build this kind of character? Well, this is where Aristotle gets really practical again. He says nobody is just born virtuous. It's a skill, just like learning to play the piano or speak a language. And how do you get good at any skill? You practice. You become a just person by doing just things over and over. You become brave by doing brave things. It's an approach to character that is all about learning by doing. And to help us practice, he gave us this amazing tool called the golden mean. The idea is that for pretty much any quality, the virtue isn't at one extreme or the other. It's the perfect middle ground, the sweet spot. On either side of that sweet spot, you've got the vices. One is the vice of too little, a deficiency, and the other is the vice of too much, an excess. This makes a lot more sense with an example. So let's talk about fear. If you have too little confidence and way too much fear, that's the vice of cowardice. But if you have way too much confidence and not enough fear, that's the other vice, recklessness. The virtue, the golden mean right in the middle, is courage. See how that works? Same thing with generosity. It's that perfect balance between being stingy on one side and just being wasteful on the other. So this sounds like a pretty neat system for becoming a better person, right? But here's the catch, and Aristotle was totally upfront about this. It is hard. Finding that perfect middle isn't like solving a math problem. Getting it right, doing the right thing to the right person in the right amount at the right time, he said that is seriously difficult. And that's why it's so impressive when people actually pull it off. So we've got this really elegant, ancient framework. It makes sense, it's inspiring, but that difficulty, the challenge of actually hitting that mean in the real world, well, it brings up a much bigger question. How well does this whole idea hold up today? Can it really stand up to a modern reality check? According to Aristotle, the secret ingredient for finding that golden mean is a special kind of wisdom he called phronesis, or practical wisdom. This isn't about being book smart or knowing a bunch of facts. It's more like having a finely tuned moral compass. It's the ability to just see what a situation really calls for, like knowing when a friend needs a shoulder to cry on versus when they need a dose of tough love. But this idea, this concept of having a clear moral vision, it forces us to ask a really uncomfortable question, especially when we turn the spotlight back on Aristotle himself. Here's the thing. Aristotle, like pretty much everyone else in his time, accepted slavery as a normal, natural part of life. The historian M.I. Finlay points out that we have no record of anyone in ancient Greece seriously challenging the institution. So if being virtuous means having the wisdom to see what is right and just, how could someone with that wisdom be blind to such a massive, profound injustice? And that right there feels like a huge crack in this beautiful theory. It leads us directly to two really powerful modern challenges. Challenges that make us question if the kind of perfect virtue Aristotle imagined is even possible for human beings. Okay, so the first challenge is this problem of historical blind spots, which we've just seen with Aristotle himself. The second one comes from a totally different field, modern psychology, and it's called the situationist challenge. So let's dig into that first one. The blind spot argument is basically this. Your culture, your time period, it can put these massive blinders on you. And these blind spots can be so huge that it's almost impossible for any one person, no matter how smart or thoughtful they are, to see the injustice. I mean, if literally everyone you know and respect thinks something is normal and fine, how are you supposed to develop the special wisdom to see that it's actually horribly wrong? Now for that second challenge. This one is a bombshell because it attacks the very foundation of Aristotle's whole idea. Modern psychology, specifically a field called situationism, asks, do we even have stable character traits? After decades of experiments, these psychologists argue that our immediate situation, where we are, who we're with, what's happening around us, is a way better predictor of how we'll act than some deep-seated character we think we have. And the evidence for this is kind of wild. Here's a classic example. Researchers found that people are way more likely to help a stranger if they're standing near a fragrant bakery than if they're near some neutral-smelling store. Just the smell of fresh bread makes us more generous. So, does that mean you're a helpful person, or did you just happen to walk by a Cinnabon? If our actions can be swayed by something so simple, maybe our so-called virtues are a lot more fragile than we think. Okay, so where does that leave us? If our moral compass can be thrown off by the era we live in, and our character can be manipulated by the smell of cookies, what are we supposed to do with Aristotle's grand project? Look, maybe the takeaway here isn't that Aristotle handed us some perfect, foolproof instruction manual for being a good person. Clearly, it has its flaws. I mean, if our character is that fragile, perfection is probably off the table. But maybe its real value, its lasting power, is that it completely reframes the question we should be asking ourselves. It pushes us beyond just, what's the right thing to do in this one moment, and forces us to confront a much deeper, much more personal question. Day by day, action by action, who am I becoming?